Hello, good afternoon. Welcome to the Dynamic Lifestyle Institute, where you can access free information which can expand on the health message based on the book, The Body Temple by Dr. Nancy and Dwayne McHenry. So the book Body Temple highlights that there are certain components which help us achieve optimum health. And I have here on the screen, what does this mean? Godly trust, open air, daily exercises, sunshine, proper rest, lots of water, always temperate, nutrition, attitude of gratitude, and benevolence. So God's plan is that we have good health. And those who have talked about health have said health is much, much important, needed than wealth. However, we know that when you have enough wealth, you can get the services you need to improve your health. So today, we are going to look at tissue and body systems. In order for us to gain a better understanding of the health message, we need to have a clearer understanding on how our body works. So we continue to expand on our understanding of body parts and how the body works by looking at the tissue, the body tissue. In our last session, we looked at the cell being the smallest, tiny little component of life, where a lot of activity takes place, where the body consumes oxygen, water, nutrients, vitamins, as well as minerals and some sugar. So for today, I am glad you're joining. Thank you and welcome. Welcome to the Body Temple, focus on body tissue as well as systems of our body. I welcome you. Thank you so much. You're so faithful. I am not sure if, yes. I'm not sure if you have questions for me from our last session. I'll be happy to answer those questions first before we move into the tissue and systems.
No, I don't think I did. I didn't write anything down. So if anything springs to mind, I will ask you.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Yes, thank you so much. I appreciate you joining and contributing. I believe that at this point, we are going to be looking at, we're going to record this session. We're going to record this session for those who might want to have access to it later. So based on what we talked about last week, we have these tiny, tiny little cells which come together. So when cells come together, they form tissue. So today we'll be looking at that. Why is this important? Most people often ask me when they look at their results from their doctor, lab results, or any other diagnostic test results, because not every test comes from the lab. We know that some comes from X-rays, MRIs, PET scans, and all that. Most people always ask me a question: what does this mean? And so to answer that, what all that means, it just means disease is present or disease is absent. So we understand diseases based on studying the body waste products or the body tissue and cells. And so I like to bring this ahead of time so people can understand why we have to understand tissue. I love what Dr. Nancy and Dwayne McHenry wrote in their book, The Body Temple. They started by talking about a verse in the Bible. And this is 1 John 4, 8 to 10. It reads, "He that loveth not, knoweth not God, for God is love. In this was manifested the love of God towards us, because that God has sent his only begotten Son into the world, that which might live through him. Herein is love, not that we loved God, but that he loved us, and he sent his Son to be the propitiation for our sins." They bring this verse ahead of time because most believers who believe in God also believe that God heals, and I'm a firm believer of that. So why this verse? Because when we believe God created, we also believe that God has a plan for us. And his plan is that we'll prosper. If you read John 10, verse 10, it says, I pray, I want you, God, it's paraphrased, that you may have life. Jesus said, I have come that you may have life abundantly, or life to the fullest, or live life to the fullest. So we make reference to these verses because our deeper understanding of cells, which differentiate and are specific, makes us understand how the body works. And when we know how the body works, we know when the body is not working right. When we read tests from the labs, tests from the x-rays and all those other tests we do, even when we touch and feel. That's why sometimes when you go for your physical, your doctor is touching your abdomen, your stomach, pushing things around your neck, feeling around your neck. They are looking for abnormalities in the body tissue. And of course, if it's in the body tissue, it then affects an organ. And then if it affects an organ, it's a system which can be affected depending on the extent of this problem. So the body structure itself is arranged in a magnificent way, beautiful way. And that this master designer, who's God, put it in everything it needed to survive. That was God. That's God's doing. So we know that God created Adam and Eve from dust. And we also know in reading the Bible that he breathed into the body, the clay, and became a living being. So therefore, as we talk about the cells, I want us to know that there's 4 major types of tissue, 4 of them. There's epithelial tissue, which Dr. Dwayne and Nance McHenry calls covering love. It covers things. And there's connective tissue, which they call supporting love, which supports things. And most of you are thinking, oh, is that why we get arthritis? Yes. Is that why we get dermatitis? Yes, because when the skin is affected, we get diseases of the skin. When the connective tissue is affected, we get diseases which affect the supporting structures, so supporting love. And then the muscle tissue, which they call judging love, and the nervous tissue, which they call the communicating love. So I know I did not put a slide to this, but I want us to think 4 things. Covering, the covering which protects, right? Connective, supporting, things which support and connect our body tissue and cells and organ. This is very relevant, very, very relevant. And I say this because at some point we'll talk about women's health. When women start experiencing like maybe lack of bladder control or prolapse of body parts and so forth. That's important because that means the connective tissue is deteriorating. And this muscle tissue, the judging love, it has to do with control as well, because we have muscles we can control, we have muscles which we cannot control, and we have muscles which are controlled by what's present in the body. And I want to just make it clear before I pose for questions. So in our bodies, we have three different types of muscles. We have the skeletal muscle, which is the voluntary muscle, the muscle I can move, I can stretch, I can reach with, I can kick with. And we have the muscle, which is in the heart, which beats on its own because of the rhythm it got from God. That's important. It's called cardiac muscle. And the third type of muscle is called smooth muscle, which is present in our digestive system, which when food hits the back of the throat, things starts moving all the way down until everything comes out is waste. And this muscle is also present in our arteries. It's smooth muscle. And I will make reference to it at some point. That's significance. And there's a direct relationship between the food we eat and this nature, the status of this smooth muscle. In other words, that's why you realize people have indigestion or people have high blood pressure. And because that's a specific tissue which relaxes and contracts depending on what else is going on in the body. If I swallow chew and swallow some rice, automatically there's speed in my digestive system, which moves the bolus of rice from the back of my throat all the way down through my alimentary canal, all the way down to my stomach, through my esophagus, because God put intelligence in the esophagus, which is that muscle, which is why they are calling it a judging love in this book, because it's muscle which can respond to brain control, to what's in the blood, to also what's happening in your body. And I say this for a reason, because you'll find out that when you go to the doctor, they check your pulse, they check your blood pressure. They're trying to understand what's going on inside you through these measures. And so that is very important to know, that judging love, that muscle tissue, because we need to take care of these 3 types of muscles. And most people who'd be listening to this video are thinking, okay, is that why we have a lot of problems like stomach cancer, cancer of the colon? Yes, because the inside muscle has a protective layer, which is what they call the covering love, the epithelial layer. And also because that inside muscle of our digestive system also have the connective tissue, which is the supporting love. That's what they call it. And then the last one is the nervous tissue. The nervous tissue in this book, they call it the communicating love, because every single system in our body functions based on the nervous tissue. As you listen to my voice, as you hear my voice speaking, your nervous system is functioning. It is your nervous system which allows you to hear me. It is your nervous system, which is the central nervous system, the brain, which allows you to understand what I'm saying. It is also the same brain which allows you to make decisions on whether you accept what I'm saying, or you embrace it, or you don't want to hear it. And it is your nervous system which allows you to click the button of your mouse and say, I don't want to hear her, or I want to turn the volume up so I can hear. It's also your nervous system which allows you to click on the virtual arm and raise your hand and answer my question. And I say this with a smile, because most people would get a stroke and they would come to see a person like me and they say, hey, doc, I cannot move my arm since I got this stroke and I don't understand what's going on with me. And that's why I'm talking about these things, because if anyone gets a stroke or somebody has a risk of a stroke, they need to understand that when tissue is damaged in the brain, you lose the function of the body part, which is mapped to that part of the brain. It is now time for you to use your nervous system and click and ask questions, or speak and ask questions, because that's how complex we are. God gave us the ability to interact with our environment, to interact with each other, because he said, be fruitful and multiply and inhabit the earth. I take your questions at this point. What are your thoughts?
So Dr. Stella, can you just reiterate what you said earlier? You said there's a relationship between the food we eat and the smooth muscle, if that's what I heard correctly. And so my question to you is, how does that impact blood pressure? Because I think you mentioned something about blood pressure as well at the same time.
Yes. Thank you so much. I love that question. So when you look at most adults over 40, they all tend to have high blood pressure. And so high blood pressure is related to the status of their arteries in the body to a certain extent. It's also related to the amount of volume in the blood. So this is significant in 2 ways. Firstly, when the body, the whole human body, is under stress, any kind of stress, doesn't matter if it's stress from a chemical, unhealthy eating, a disease happening, or a broken bone, obviously it's created to survive. So naturally, any threats to the body generally raises blood pressure. That's one reason. So therefore, when the body is tasked with a lot of work in the digestive system itself. It stresses the body. Not only that, it recruits the energy from the heart to try and feed into that area where digestion is taking place so that digestion can take place. So how we eat and what we eat definitely affects blood pressure in many ways. So you're talking about the body stressed. You're also talking about the demand of energy from the heart for digestion to take place, because remember, there's no function in the body which happens without blood flowing. That's part of it. And then to make things worse now, our bodies have almost like locks and keys. Remember we talked about this, where any chemical can close the door and open the door. And you asked a beautiful question. So the nature of the smooth muscle is such that there are chemical reactions which makes it get tight and relax. That's ongoing. Just like when food enters the digestive system, it stretches the smooth muscle and allows the smooth muscle to stretch and relax, stretch and relax. It's almost like a snake-like movement is what they call it. It's called peristalsis. And that's what moves that food down the digestive pathways. And that process takes energy. And that process required blood to flow. Therefore, when people eat meals which don't have fiber, enough fiber, the digestive system is clogged. Makes sense, right? And when the digestive system is clogged, the body now needs energy, more energy to push things out. A lot of people end up with hemorrhoids. Hemorrhoids are just the inside of your intestines showing up at the bottom end of the body. That's what it is. So every single thing is tied to nutrition to a bigger extent. So that's another element. The last element is that anything which is present in food can either help the muscles relax, those smooth muscles, or tighten. And these smooth muscles are found in quite a lot of our body parts. They're also found in the bladder. They're also found in the eyes and certain areas because, and you think about it, everywhere where blood glows, there's an artery, right?
Yeah.
So everywhere where blood glows, there's smooth muscle. And I don't have control over my smooth muscle. So the smooth muscle tend to respond to the nervous system, which we'll talk about in detail. You've heard about the flight, fright, fight mechanism. Mm-hmm. That is the mechanism, one of the mechanisms which controls the smooth muscle. Yes. And so now we see if someone is constantly drinking cold foods or extreme hot food, very hot food, the demand on digestion from these kind of, healthy eating options is higher. And that's where the connection between the health message and nutrition comes in, the nutritional component of it. In that restoration of good health is based on our eating habits. And the same goes to people who eat very big meals before they sleep. You know what that does? It raises the blood pressure inside us, not in the arteries all over the arms, in the abdominal cavity area, and it's called portal hypertension, blood pressure which is high where the internal organs reside. So it becomes a threat to the efficiency of these organs. They are not able to function properly because pressure is high in the inside. I'm using just layman terms here so it doesn't conflict with pressure high in the arm. See, because we measure blood pressure in the arm. We never measure blood pressure inside us, but blood pressure inside our guts and everything else also it can be high.
Yes.
And that demand comes from a lot of lifestyle related things. And that's why you realize that when we're talking about eating healthy, it's not just healthy in terms of tasty food. It's analyzing what kind of food am I eating? What's in this food? And is this good for my tissues, my cells, and my organs? So we tend to see a lot of diseases which probably did exist in the past, but there are more now, which are called chronic diseases, which are non-communicable diseases, which are also known as preventable diseases, diseases we can prevent. And so your question you've asked is a beautiful question, because we can further take it further and say, so how therefore do we have side effects from certain drugs? And now it brings us back again from this, it's a cycle.
Yes. And actually, as you were speaking as well, I could see how, with the 8 laws of health, how important it is, and how we should be temperate, and we shouldn't be gluttonous, because I guess if you're constantly eating as well, that's putting the body under extra pressure, because it's having to work to digest, etc. Yeah.
Beautiful. Yes, I like what you said. And that's why when you read Ellen G. White's books, she wrote those books with so much inspiration and intelligence that there's nothing science has said is wrong. So what has happened over the years, scientists have studied the human body to try and understand what goes on in it. That's why we constantly have research. Anytime a new disease comes up, we want to research. We want to recruit as many people who have that condition to see how can we help them. So science, which is research in diseases, has confirmed all of what Ellen G. White wrote in her books. Every single one of them on health, yes. We see bits and pieces of it because science has resulted in us having doctors for every body part. But to every body part, blood goes.
Yeah.
So in her book, she writes a lot about how you can have good blood and unhealthy blood. If you read counsels on diets and foods or healthful living, you hear her say that. And I love the question you asked, because we only know about what's going on in the body based on diagnostics. And one of the diagnostics we do on a regular basis is blood work. And so people will come to me and say, I don't understand. What does this mean? And I'll sit down with them and tell them, your potassium, your sodium is too high. And then they'll ask me a question and say, so where is this sodium coming from? Well, from the salt you put on your food when you eat. So we'll ask me a very important question, because it then translates to the same health message, which gives us a better understanding on how to care for this body temple.
Yes. Sorry, continue.
No, you can. I'm here to answer your questions, because the more I explain what your needs are, areas are, the more I'm helpful to you. I just come here to just share this, because you ask very good questions, and I can answer your questions all day long, and it will be fine with me.
Oh, thank you. So as you're speaking and you're talking about, we having to sort of look after our bodies, etc., I got to thinking, certain sections of society, certain nations, let's say, are under greater pressure in society because of, let's say, for argument's sake, oppression, marginalization, and so they live under a sort of a heightened level of stress, say. So it kind of stands to reason that certain sections are at higher risk of blood pressure, for instance, because if you're highly stressed all the time, this is going to be manifested in certain illnesses, diseases like blood pressure. You hear in certain communities they have a higher incidence of diabetes, etc. But it's kind of as a result of the environment in which we live. So clearly God made us, God made society. How do we combat that? Because this is something that we've almost inherited.
Okay, so and you ask a very, very important question. So they have come up with what they call social determinants of health.
Yeah.
And so social determinants of health have taught us that 40% of our health, almost 40% is based on environmental factors, 4 out of 10. And 2 out of 10 is clinical care, 20%. And 3 out of 10 is behavioral. And 10% is genetics.
Mhm.
So with what you're saying, yes, definitely. We see a lot of conditions which are very common in developing countries, and strokes and high blood pressure is very common in developing countries. But there are also some diseases which are rare there, like autoimmune diseases and some other diseases like heart attacks and high cholesterol. They're not common because those populations tend to consume a lot of fiber, a lot of raw, freshly grown food, because they don't have refrigerators in certain parts of the world. A lot of, countries don't have refrigeration because they have no electricity. So with what you're saying, therefore, the health message, there is no one size fit all. And that's the whole idea why I'm sharing this, because you bring a valid point. However, when God created us, he created us in a way that we can achieve optimum health if we follow the message he gave us in the Bible. Sorry, my computer is powering out. I forgot to charge it. Just have to plug it in. Yeah, so God gave us this health message in the book of Genesis, chapter 1, verse 29. That's the foundation of the health message in terms of nutrition, eating. But also God gave us the health message when he talked about, my peace I give to you, my peace I live with you. And when he talks about, if it were all possible, live at peace with all men. So with what you're talking about here, Sister PG, is that when God gave us the comprehensive Bible, he gave us every single thing we need for optimum living. However, we as a society, we've been influenced by industrialization, commercialization, such that even the way we share the message itself, the everlasting gospel, is more from a commercial perspective rather than from a biblical perspective. So therefore, the health message is the arm which is going to steer us back to see what is exactly the everlasting gospel. So in certain parts of the world, the message should be on managing stress, how to cope, with what's going on. And remember, you asked me today to speak on energy, and what came to my mind was resilience has deeper roots. And so with what you're saying, our ability to survive challenges has deeper roots, and those roots are in the Word of God. They are grounded in the Bible, because we know that suffering is coming from every end. So when you look at the human body, it has challenges from within and from without. The same thing when you look at the church of God, the remnant church, has challenges from within and from without. So we therefore are called to that place where, as individuals, we have to understand how this health message is connected to God's plan of salvation. And it's embedded in the premises of experiencing balance. I hope I answered your question.
Yes, you did. Thank you very much, Dr. Stella. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you. Yeah, so as we continue to talk now, thank you for joining those who just joined us. I did not share the link in the groups, but I finally realized it. So with what we just talked about here, we're talking about how the body temple message of understanding tissue will help us understand how our body responds to food, right? And we will have a whole session on how the body works in terms of digestion. However, it's important to know that when we indulge in overeating, as you said, the stomach hurts. Most people will tell you that. When I overeat, my stomach hurt. Or when I started overeating, my stomach was hurting, but now it's gotten used to it. So the question you asked about the smooth muscle, it tends to stretch over time. It stretches and stretches and stretches. So we do see cases of people who have perforation in their intestines. And the intestines are in the digestive system. I don't want to call it the stomach because the stomach is above the intestine. We see perforation, we see ulcerations, which are very common in the GI system. We see colitis, we see diverticulitis or diverticulosis, which is pockets forming inside the digestive system, which hurts like the dickens. We also see in the arteries bulges, and they call them aneurysms, because the pressure is so high that it weakens the walls of the arteries, and those bulges can burst. So people do get a stroke from an aneurysm. If it happens in the major aorta, it's called an aortic aneurysm. And if this happens in the arteries, it's an arterial aneurysm. And yes, every day I hear people say, pray for me. My father had a stroke. My sister had a stroke. And I asked them, must have had high blood pressure. In most of the cases, yes, they did not take their pills. Or yes, or perhaps somebody just passed away and they were in so much stress. Or maybe someone lost their jobs. Or somebody was diagnosed with cancer. So stress of life can raise somebody's blood pressure at any given time. That's why there are processes in place and ways of making sure that you create balance every day. So that was on tissue, smooth muscles. So I am going to talk a little bit about that next layer, the first layer, which I called epithelial tissue. Epithelial tissue is soft. So I want you, as you're listening to me, take your hand and just rub your arm. See how delicate that is? That is delicate. So when we say we are fearfully and wonderfully made, God created us with the ability to feel, to move, to sense, and make decisions. You touch your arm, that's comfortable. But if somebody grabs you real quick or stabs you with something, you feel pain. And so the body has no differentiation between emotional pain, physical pain, chemical pain at all. It just knows it's in pain internally. So I say this ahead of time because most people wonder, so why should we live at peace? It's significant. And I'll tell you the significance. Remember, we talked about the GI system as a pipeline, which goes all the way up and down. That pipeline responds. I can put my video on so you can see me. You're not looking at my screen the whole time. That pipeline, which is inside us, responds to stress. And I love the question I was asked earlier. When stress is in the body, it makes smooth muscle tight, very tight, that even sometimes going to the restroom after you eat becomes a job where you have to force things out. It's also becomes so tight that a person can go for days without emptying their bowels. And if the person goes for days without emptying their bowels, you realize that the strain on the body itself will eventually lead to high blood pressure over time. So we do see some people who suffer from high blood pressure just because they have been under too much stress, which is either from the inside or from the outside. Therefore, it's important that every single person who's living today understands God, when He created us, He created us with enough intelligence, not just in our brain, but also intelligence in our tissue. This intelligence is so profound that if you start to think about it, every time when messages come to your ears, you make decisions. And so when God created human beings, He set us apart from the rest of creation in that He gave us capacity to reason, make decisions, and impact our environment in a positive way. So you're all thinking, okay, so what's the significance between all what you're saying, what I'm saying, and the health message in the everlasting gospel? Very, very significant. As the remnant, the end time people, the last day people who have a message, if we find ourselves, we are not understanding the effect of any kind of message to our body, we'll struggle. We'll even struggle with basic things of life. God never promised a world without pain. In fact, he passed the sentence in the Garden of Eden, and he said, the enemy will really bruise your heel and you crush his head, or you bruise his head. Paraphrasing, because God never said that there will be no pain. What God says is, I'm able to keep you on the path which I have set you. And so when it comes to the health message, therefore, I just want us to really realize that we are so complex and fearfully, wonderfully made, in that the decisions we make, every single decision you make affects your body tissue one way or the other. And that's why I start here. And it is when I share this message with most of my clients, they say, you're the first person to make me realize that when I'm angry with my husband, it raises my blood pressure. And I said, yes. You're the first person who makes me realize that when I eat certain foods, I cough at night. And I said, yes, because you have acid reflux. It's silent. So acid reflux doesn't always burn. It can make you cough profusely all night or after you eat it. And most people don't know that, because the fumes are coming up, and that smooth muscle responds to anything which is present in its environment, in other words. So if you picture this, the next time you put food in your mouth, pay attention. As soon as you put food in the mouth, or you smell the nice smelling food somebody's cooking, you salivate. That's the intelligence from God. So some of those smooth muscles I talked about, they're also present in glands. And these glands includes salivary glands, which are in the mouth. It includes tear ducts and glands, which are in the eyes. It includes glands which are inside our digestive system, which secretes mucus. It includes glands which is in the female reproductive system, which also secretes certain things. So I like to really spend a lot of time on tissue, because I like, people to connect the dots and say, okay, so what does it mean? It means that every single thing we expose our body to, doesn't matter, be it music, be it food, be it makeup, be it perfume, it wouldn't matter what you expose your body, or a medicine, the body responds to it. And I love one of my clients who came to see me this week, and we were just talking. And I said to him, I don't remember what we were talking about, but it had to do with medication. So he said, well, there's a lot of things going on out there. I said, yeah. I said, he brought up one thing about perfume. And he said, well, perfume comes from whale vomit. I said, I didn't know that. Whale vomit? How do they get it? And he said, well, they make the whales vomit. That's why how they make perfume. And I began to think, quite a lot of seniors, when they are next to someone with a heavy duty perfume, they cough. They can even get an asthmatic attack. And so we were talking, and I said, yeah, that makes sense. Even lisinopril comes from snake venom. And he said, oh yeah, and one of my drugs comes from a toad. I said, yes, a lot of drugs come from things like that. Digitalis comes from frogs, and so forth. So I'm not here to knock any drug, but I'm just letting you know that the body will respond to anything which goes in it. It either heals from it, or it gets worse from it. It gets sick from it. So most people really love perfume. But I can tell you that when I worked at a college as a professor, our students, we did not allow them to wear perfume when they went on a clinical, because we didn't want to make our patients sick, because patients do get sick. It was one of the checklists. You will not wear your perfume when you go out on a clinical, because for those of you who are in nursing, you know that. So it then brings this to my mind. Does this perfume have a lot of some of the breathing problems we see today? The answer is yes, because the body responds to whatever is exposed to, be it food, be it on your skin, be it on in your nose, be it anywhere in your body. That's why you see even the Bible talks about tattooing, painting your body is not good, because those chemicals, they enter your nervous system. We see a lot today of people who present with poor judgments, brain issues, or behavioral issues, because they've been exposed to too many toxins. So I want to pause here for your questions. I know some people just joined. I just wanted to let you know that this is recorded, is live on YouTube. You can always visit it. We've done a few series so far. We are talking about understanding how fearfully and wonderfully made we are, and how all this connects with God's plan to save us, in that we live in peace with living life abundantly. So your questions at this point. Thank you. Okay, silence is golden. So we are moving right along. So we said when you touched yourself, you felt how delicate you are. So the inside of your digestive system has a layer which covers your whole tract, all the way from the back of your throat, all the way to the anus where things come through. And that layer is smooth. And therefore, when we eat food, we have to be mindful of what the food is doing to the inside smooth layer, which we talked about is the covering love. Because once that's damaged, the inside of the digestive system is damaged. We see ulcers, we see pockets, we call them diverticulitis or diverticulosis. We see colitis, and we even see colon cancer, which is very common these days. So even though in developing countries, they do what they call a colonoscopy, all it is looking, checking things out. A colonoscopy is when they go through the anus with some scope, a camera to see, to look if there are polyps. These are finger-like projections which look like fingers, which are precursors for colon cancer. So a lot of people who suffer from chronic constipation are at risk of getting problems with their colon because they are not emptying the contents of their bowels, which is feces, on time. They tend to have toxins be reabsorbed back in the body again and causing a lot of other diseases we see today. Some may be mood problems, some may be joint problems, some may even be problems associated with mental health as well, because a toxin can come from your own feces not coming out of you on time. So when we say we are fearfully, wonderfully made, we have to be mindful how we care for our bodies. Stress can cause constipation. Unhealthy eating can cause constipation. Lack of water in the body can cause constipation, as well as other diseases. A person who has diabetes will suffer from constipation because diabetes causes what we call gastroparesis, which means paralyzes your GI system. So I'll pause for your questions before we move on to talk a little bit about the function of the smooth layer, which is fearfully and wonderfully made inside you. What are some of the questions you have for me? Perfect. Silence is golden. So remember, we said the epithelium.
Sorry, Dr. Stella. Can I
Yes.
ask, is it normal to go to toilet once a day in like a bowel movement? Like for myself, every time when I woke up, maybe before 1 hour, my bowel movement is so tense that I know that every morning when I wake up, I have to go to the toilet. But then that's it for the day. Unless if maybe I've eaten something that upset my stomach, that's when I can maybe go frequently. But on my normal daily basis, I go once a day. Is it normal?
Yes, I'm going to answer that question intelligently. That's a beautiful question, and I'm so glad you answered it. I'm going to start by saying what goes in must come out, and it should not be too long before it comes out. And I often share with my clients this. Yes, it's normal to have a regular bowel movement every morning. That is excellent because you got to move before you eat. If you find yourself, you wake up in the morning, you have breakfast, you have lunch, you have dinner, and you haven't moved, chances are maybe you just need to drink water and just eat a banana to sustain you until you move. You bring a very valid point there. So here's the formula. You should move as much as you eat. For most people who eat a decent meal, which is like a 9-inch plate, I don't know how much is 9 inches. There's 2 centimeters in an inch, so it's 9 divided by 2.5. something like that, like a 4 centimeter diameter or 9 centimeter diameter, if you can, your regular plate. If you eat 3 of those full a day, you need to move your bowels 3 times. So there's a formula I always share with my clients. I ask them how many days are in a week, and they tell me 7. And I said, so what is 7 by 3? For those who eat 3 meals, they tell me 21. So for somebody who's eating 3 meals, you need 21 movements if you're eliminating efficiently. So for someone who moves their bowel every other day, for instance, and they eat 3 meals a day, it's 21 minus 4. So that means that person has at least 17 of their bowel movements staying inside them. We tend to see a lot of skin issues sometimes. We tend to see a lot of people who have other problems when they are constipated. Chronic constipation is a very common thing. A lot of people suffer from it. So to answer your question, depending on the amount of food you're eating, if you're eating a 9-inch plate 3 times, 1 movement is not sufficient. Either you might have to up your water, or you might have to check the fiber, or revisit the time of food you're eating, or perhaps get some form of medical test done, because we should move, and the move should be smooth. So in our program, we do have an app which we use, and people track their moves. I'm surprised at how many people say, oh, I went from having cracks to now it's smooth. It should be smooth and continuous. So people who have like little pellets or little rocks coming out, that's a sign that something is not going on well. I can give you the water formula. And remember, this session is not meant to treat anyone or diagnose anyone. It's information for educational purposes. The formula for water is half your body weight in ounces. Sorry, I speak in ounces because I understand liters, but you would have to convert to liters. So if somebody weighs 200 pounds, their liquid intake, unless if they have a disease which prohibits them from taking fluids, like somebody with a renal disease might be on a limited fluid intake, it should be half their body weight in ounces of water. So a 200-pound woman or man should take 100 ounces a day, and a glass of water is like 8 ounces. So that person is looking at 10 to 12 ounces of water, because you consume water based on your body size and your body needs. Someone who's working outside and sweating all day might need a little more water than someone who sits in front of their computer all day and never sweats. So you have to specifically look at your situation, because there's no one size fit all. Quite often they say 8 glasses a day, but I can tell you 8 glasses a day is not sufficient for someone who is over 300 pounds or 400 pounds. It's not sufficient. So I'll pause for your questions before I do that. Did I answer your question right?
Yes, thank you, Dr. Stella. Then I'll continue on the other one. Like every day, first thing in the morning, I drink like 500 ml of warm water with something in it. But then I have to be like maybe after 30 minutes or 1 hour, I go like maybe 3 times when I'm so pressed. Like, not that I'll be holding it, but then it keeps occurring every time I'm drinking water. Then the age of going to the toilet increases. So is it my water is going out immediately, or some is restored within my system, or I'm losing all of it? I don't understand.
Okay, yeah, so that one, I'm gonna have to follow up with that one on a personal level, if you don't mind, but I'll answer. You're talking about urination in the bathroom, water going out of you. Yes. And so there are certain things, and I'm gonna answer this in a way that everybody understands what I'm gonna say here. There are certain things, when we eat them or drink them, they cause what we call diuresis. Diuresis is when you have increased urine, or you have to empty your bladder quick, and a lot of emptying of your bladder, which means you're urinating. So depending on what that something is, it could be something which triggers diuresis. In other words, when I drink water, I don't have to go right away. It takes a little bit of time for this water to be absorbed in my GI, for it to go through my kidneys. It takes a little bit of time. It's not going to happen right away. However, there are certain chemicals, as I have advocated before, which open certain doors and they close certain doors. So there are certain things, when we take them in our bodies, makes us have to go to the bathroom sooner than later. That's an internal process which allows us to empty, to eliminate at a normal pace or with agency. And I'll say this, a good example is alcohol. Alcohol is known as a diuretic. It makes people produce more urine. Other examples would include things like watermelon. Watermelon would make people go and urinate more because it is that diuretic effect, which means it produces more urine. So also, I want to just say this. This body we talked about, remember we talked about the smooth muscle? The smooth muscle is also present in the bladder and its valves. The bladder has valves which control things to come out. So depending on what somebody is taking in the morning, that can relax the muscles and let things come out more than required. So I say something because I don't want to say drug, because I don't want anybody to start pointing fingers at their drugs or anything. So some of the questions, like the question you asked me, I would want to follow up with you with that, because there's a lot of more other factors too. The integrity of the muscles matter. So at the base of the pelvis, in the female male area, there's muscles there. Sometimes those muscles are weak. Sometimes those muscles are challenged because there's something else pressing on them. So there's quite a few factors. So I will really take that question on a personal level and talk to you directly, because it's not normal that when I drink water, I'm just going to go right away. But it can happen depending on what's causing it to happen. It's normal that if I eat something, in less than 20 minutes, I'm going to go to the bathroom. It's very normal because there are certain things which stimulates the bowels to move very fast. And it happens also sometimes when you eat a meal, you go right away. It's normal for some people. It's very normal with babies. After a baby is done feeding and you're burping the baby, you might just hear a loud sound. An explosion is happening. They're emptying their bowels. It happens more with babies than adults, because as adults, we tend to have a slower digestive system. But I want to address your question at a later time when I talk to you personally. Is that okay?
Dr. Stella, that's okay. Thank you.
I hope I answered your question.
Yes, you did. Thank you very much.
Dr. Stella?
Yes.
I have a question as well, kind of like a follow-up on what Sister Progress has asked. Is it possible to have sufficient excretion, like you're saying, you eat 3 meals, you go to the bathroom 3 times a day, but have insufficient defecation?
Yeah, so what by insufficient, you mean like you're not eliminating enough?
Yes, you're not eliminating. Yes, you're excreting, but you're not eliminating enough in your body what needs to go out.
It's very possible, yes. It's possible depending on what you eat. I'll give you an example, and it's an extreme example, don't judge me. If somebody eats maybe a pound of cheese, they may not go to the bathroom anytime soon because there's no fiber in cheese. But if someone, for instance, eats maybe a whole bowl of cabbage or vegetables, they might move a little more. So this passage, which we talked about, has this muscle which moves things down. Depending on what is present in what you eat is possible. However, sometimes people go a little bit when they have a lot more left. And it's important to look at what it looks like when it comes out. If it's really smooth and long, it's probably sufficient. But if it's little, dots and grains and rocks coming out where you have to force, then perhaps you need a little more water. Or there's something else, because at the end, before everything comes out, the body has the terminal colon, and its job is to absorb the water back in. So it balances things out. So when a person is dehydrated, for instance, they might not have smooth moves. So when it comes to smooth moves, fiber and water are your friends. Did I answer your question there?
Okay, thank you, Dr. Stella. Yeah, because I was just thinking that, for some of us, I used to think that it's enough to just, go to the bathroom. But, so I learned later that, it's not just about going to the bathroom. It's also about that whole process. Are you really eliminating what needs to be eliminated in your body? Thank you.
Thank you so much. Yes, and that's a very good observation. Am I eliminating? And most of the time, when people are not eliminating enough, it becomes a strain. And the next one might be you have to push a little harder. We should not have to push. Things should come out when they're ready. And so you might have to play around with a few foods and see what works well with you, because most people are not eating enough fiber. And I shared in our previous video that there's a formula to make sure that you eat enough fiber. Half your plate should be vegetables, raw or cooked, a quarter starch, and a quarter protein. And if you see you're not consuming enough fiber, you might see some of the results we see. However, you might also need to get professional help to make sure that you don't have anything else growing. And I want to say this before I come to your questions, Sister Colina. At some point, I did share this. Even though the body has about 42,000 trillion cells or more than that, the body has also other organisms which live in us. It's called microbiome. It's also called parasites in other terms. So inside most people's bodies are worms, tapeworms, roundworms, and other feeders which feed more on certain food. So this microbiome, sometimes when people have parasites and worms in their digestive system, they struggle. They struggle maintaining a healthy digestive system. They struggle maintaining a healthy bowel movement, and it's common. So most developing countries, they will do lab work and they'll also look for parasites. It doesn't always happen that a person would have analysis of what's inside them. And so there are some microbacillus, there's some also fungi and bacteria which resides in here. And I want to talk a little bit about one of the bacteria which is also present in some people, and it's called H. pylori. It's a long word, you just have to know it's H. pylori. So most people who have like a stomach which is distended, like a little bit, like they look pregnant, they might be having a bacterial infection known as H. pylori. So I want to point this out now so that you all understand it's not necessarily purely food. It's also a factor that there could be other invaders in our system. They are good invaders, and we call those good bacteria and germs. They aid digestion. So some of you have heard about probiotics. And I touched a little bit about probiotics in one of the videos. So probiotics aids digestion. So for most people who've used strong antibiotics at some point in their life, I'm one of those people who have not used antibiotics maybe once in my life, if I can recall. We've used like heavy duty antibiotics like the doxycyclines and the other heavy duty ones, the penicillins. And there's a lot of other heavy duty antibiotics which are used and they are needed. It cleans out the good bacteria. It's gone. So most people's digestive problem might be they are lacking microbiome. And I say this, last time, that's why you see most pregnant women who eat dirt. We call it dirt in America, but it's clay. Most people would eat clay from an anthill or from a tree. It's good with iron. Probiotics are found in dirt. I'm not saying go and graze on dirt when you live here, but I want you to know that there is a lot of elements which comes from the earth, which improves our health. And we'll talk about that later time. So I hope I answered your question there. Did I answer your question right?
Yes, Dr. Stella.
Perfect. And so we are taking the next question, Sister Colina.
I just wanted to find out if A diet is responsible for a weak rectum.
To a certain extent, yes. However, the rectum is a muscle. It's one of those muscles which is a little bit, has some form of voluntary control, which is the skeletal part, and also the smooth part, which is just influenced by what's above it, because things are coming down. So to a certain extent, yes, but also muscles can be weak for other reasons. So for most females who've given birth naturally to children, they might also end up with weakness of the muscles at the base, the basin. I want to call it the basin because I want to be polite. So at the core of the bottom of, female, male is muscles. These muscles maintain the structure as well as the function. So to a certain extent, it could be weakness of the muscles. And muscles can be weak for many different reasons. Sometimes it's a neurological problem that the nerves are not firing or are intact. Sometimes it's because just weakness is set in. This happens quite a bit. And perhaps chronic constipation. So when someone has a weak rectum, they need to have it looked at. I did talk last week about all the different specialists we have in this world. We have what they call proctologists. Proctologists are specialists which deal with rectal and anal diseases. So I would have that checked into to make sure that there is nothing else pressing anything anywhere, because sometimes there is, and we don't know until we do tests. So, and the history of that person's medical history also has a lot to, contribute to this. And a physical check. So when they are looking for prostate, they usually do a finger check. They call it a digital check for men, but it might be something which needs some palpations with hands to really figure out where the issue is. So seeing a doctor is the best thing to do at this point, if somebody has that.
I have heard people who say that for the stool to move smoothly, you have to sit at an angle, and it must give a S shape.
Beautiful question. Yes, beautiful statement. Yes. So I'm going to say this, and I don't want to be quoted wrongly. We do see a lot of colon cancer, and I did read an article which did attribute the fact that it's not very common in developed countries because they squat. Okay, so modern day has most of our toilets sits high. Like in most countries now, because we have to be user-friendly to accommodate people with disabilities, most public places, the toilet stool is very high. So for a short person who's sitting on a high toilet stool, they might not be able to eliminate sufficiently. So the formula is your legs should be above your hip. So if you're sitting on a toilet, it's just my formula I'm going to give you. If you're sitting on your toilet and your feet cannot be flat on the ground, like you have to be on your toes to sit on it, that toilet is too high. So perhaps, having a lower toilet seat would help eliminate. So in terms of a certain angle, the only thing I can tell you is that position of the body. I'm tall, so most toilet seats would fit me well. But if someone else was probably like 3/4 my height, maybe somebody who's 150 or 160 centimeters, they probably won't be comfortable sitting in a regular toilet seat. So what some people do, they get a little stool and they put their legs on it. I know some people who do that personally, and I'm not saying you should do that, but you should empty completely. The angle you're talking about is a person is sitting upright. Not everybody sits upright. Some people sitting backwards or leaning forward, depending on their posture. So perhaps make sure that you change a position a couple of times when you're sitting on the toilet might help empty completely. But I'm not aware of a particular angle per se, which say you gotta move your leg this way. I mean, if you have to spread your legs to eliminate your bowels, by all means, let's get it out. That's all I say. But that's a good question. Thank you. Did I answer your question?
You did. Thank you so much.
Perfect. If there are any more questions, please just raise your hand. So we are moving right along. Now we understand that we are smooth inside, just like when you touch your skin. Therefore, what you put inside you or what you put on the skin can affect the smoothness of the skin. So this smoothness, which is lining the GI system, and it's easier for me to just talk about the digestive system because we all eat, but I also want you to think about your arteries, where your blood is flowing. It's the same thing. And I say this because most people don't realize that inside of arteries, our blood arteries, it's smooth until something gets in there and damages them. And so a lot of the toxins we see or the chemicals which people consume in food, if it escapes the digestive system and goes into your blood, it affects the arteries inside. So the inside of the arteries are damaged. And when they are damaged, we have erosion. And when there's erosion, cholesterol will come and patch and patch and patch. And that patch is solid. So we do see people with high blood pressure because of reduced size of the artery, because there's a lot of fat deposits inside those arteries. And it's related to people who have high cholesterol. It's an issue. So consumption of fat, extra fat, can really clog the arteries. And also, I wanted to talk about something here. This smoothness, which we have inside us, there is certain tissue in our body which is more delicate. And so when you read the Bible and says you're fearfully, wonderfully made, you have to understand that when God made the brain, he made the brain more delicate than anything else in the world. And when he made the heart muscle, he made the heart muscle sensitive, so sensitive. That's why we have to guard our hearts. That's how we have to guard our minds. Because the minute I just think anything which is not of value about any one of you, when I feel I'm threatened, chemicals start getting secreted in my body. And right away, my blood pressure can go up because my body's like, you gotta be prepared to fight. You gotta fight with everything you have, So I just say this because this softness, therefore, brings us to an understanding on how we need to nourish our body, because once the food hits the back of my throat, I have no control what goes on inside me. And that's what I tell my clients. They're like, what do you mean? I'm like, yes, my control is before it gets in there. When I choose not to eat something, I have control. Once I eat it, how the body handles is up to the intelligence of the body, which God put in there. And so why I say this, because when I talked about the 4 layers, for those who just joined, we say tissue has 4 types. It is epithelial tissue, which the authors of the book, The Body Temple, calls covering love, the one which covers and protects. And epithelial tissue is present at every single organ level. It's also supported by the next one, which is connective tissue, like supporting love, supporting these cells, bringing them together, because the cells are little, they need to be bound. And you're thinking, so this supporting love varies from organ to organ? Yes, it does. And then we have the muscle, which they call judging love. That muscle controls movement. The muscles we have in our body are for movement. The heart pumps, it moves, muscles move. The smooth muscle in our GI, our eyes, our bladder, moves things out. The skeletal muscle, which is in our legs, in our arms, our abdomen, our back, our neck, moves the body parts. So this judging love, movement, is one of the important components of the health message. Moving. We need things to move the way God created them to move, because God put Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden so they would till the land. He didn't put Adam and Eve in front of the computer and sit on the computer all day and say, I'm working. Working is when I get up from my computer and I move. So work is defined by movement, and not what I think I'm doing is work. So for most people who have not fully embraced the health message, they are suffering from diseases of being sedentary, because this connective tissue, if it's supposed to be moving things around, it does not move when I'm not moving. So the last part is the nervous tissue, which is the communicating love. the one which sends the messages across the room. If you eat a watermelon, you see the watermelons are in season and you eat the whole watermelon, you'll be running to the bathroom most of the day because that watermelon is going to move water out quick, fast, ongoing, whichever way it needs to, because the body is trying to maintain a balance of water. So I say this because earlier on I heard the word temperance. Yes, everything in moderation, because the intelligence of the body which is fearfully and wonderfully made by God, cannot deal with excess. So some of the diseases we see today is because we consume too much. And I like to make reference to a biblical concept, which is reality. When they were traveling from Egypt to the promised land, God told the children of Israel, they gave them instructions through Moses of what to do with manna when it falls from heaven. They were supposed to just collect only what they need. And when you read the Bible, it talks about when they collected extra, it spoiled. When they thought they'll get extra during the week, with the exception of Friday night, it's spoiled. God created it in a way that only the day he ordained for rest would be the day they would not collect manna. And why I say this, most of the diseases we suffer from, we eat too much. We eat more than we need. And this body, this extra food end up being stored and clogs the system. And not only that, it's not being used for energy, for anything. So it ends up being almost spoiled in our body. It spoils things. It clogs things also. So when you read Ellen G. White's books, you realize that the servant of the Lord wrote this in a very intricate way. He said, she says, I'm paraphrasing, the body is a machine. The human body is a machine. I've heard people say this. People who made cars analyzed how the human body worked and they came up with a vehicle. So this machine, which Sister White talks about, she said it's not meant to be clogged. Some people consume excess and they end up with a clogged system. And a clogged system means a clogged brain. Okay, we forget things sometimes. We have bad temperament sometimes because the system is clogged. It's not our fault. So this particular layer is the layer which absorbs, that's the lining of your intestine. And most of you listening to this sound of my voice have heard this, that we have a second brain in our stomach. We have the first brain, which is in our head. We have the second brain in our stomach. So most people eat according to the second brain. How I feel I want to taste this food when it goes down through my mouth is how I eat. However, we have to think, whatever we eat is absorbed in the intestines. So whether it's food or not, it still gets absorbed. What doesn't get absorbed is secreted. And what doesn't get secreted, the body can decide it's going to decompose for a couple of days and the liquid goes back again. Whatever, depending on how you want to look at it. Because this intestine, from all the way to the mouth to the anus, is meant to break down food, absorb food, and push waste out. So this also epithelial layer secretes secretions. So inside us is mucus and fluid, which moves things around, allows smooth moves. So there are certain foods which dries up the system. And there are also certain foods which keeps the system working efficiently. So part of understanding the health message is for you to figure out how your body is responding when you eat. Because you and I are the very subjects of research. Research looked at you and I for years and came up with conclusions. If they eat this way, they feel like this. They are sick like this, we give them this. And if this helps 1,000 people, 1,000,000 people, they need to help everybody. So researchers come up with good suggestions on how to help us when we are diseased. We also need to look at the preventive side. So this same epithelial tissue transports things. And I say this because when you look at the kidney function, the kidney is tubes. Those same tubes have epithelial cells. So for most people who end up with end-stage renal disease, the kidneys shut down, the kidneys fail, they have damaged epithelial tissue. And so for most people who end up with high blood pressure or who start seeing signs of high blood pressure, their kidneys are failing. I just want you to know that, because blood pressure, high blood pressure, even though it's a cardiac, which is a heart condition classified under the cardiac components, it's actually a renal issue because the kidney regulates water. And if the kidney is regulating water levels, blood pressure can adjust accordingly as the kidneys do that, because the kidneys have an intelligence of its own. So that's the third thing, transports things. So you must be thinking, oh, wait a minute. So this smoothness, which Dr. Stella is talking about, is therefore present everywhere in my body. Yes, it is. Epithelial tissue is present, and because things move constantly. However, when this epithelial tissue is impaired, movement is also impaired. And the next thing is it excretes, like I said, and then protects like the skin. So I always want you to make reference to your skin. When your skin is intact, the underlying layers are protected. When skin is broken, bacteria and viruses enter and we get diseases as well. So you are listening to me as like, oh, is that why Ellen G. White talks about hygiene and dressing? Yes, she hammers this message home so much so. She talks about the dress reform, and the dress reform and hygiene are cousins, you know? So hygiene doesn't always mean just taking a shower. Hygiene means to be mindful on what I put on my skin. Modern day has such that we have toxins coming out of a lot of the creams we use. That's why a lot of people who are pursuing the medical missionary route are now making their own lotions, because a lot of things which sits on the shelf have a lot of chemicals to increase the shelf life. So if I make something and I'm in the business of making lotions and I want to stay in business until my lotion sells, I'll make sure my lotion doesn't expire anytime soon. So it will stay on the shelf until my customers have bought it. So I say this with a smile because most people who are looking for the medical missionary pathway or the country living pathway are actually on the right path, because when things get tight, and I'm in the business of making lotions, and people are in a situation where there's a shortage, I'll raise the price of my lotion. It's just that, like that. It's supply versus demand. So there's a direct correlation with the health message, as well as the end time message, which was given to the Seventh-day Adventist Church. We are the only church with the end time message. And so I bring this now because you're thinking, okay, wait a minute, what's the relevance? That same layer, which I'm talking about, receives signals. It receives signals and it helps individuals make a decision. Let me expand on this. A good example is your taste buds. When I taste something and it tastes good, the memory stays with me. Next time I see it, I want it. And so to a certain extent, most people who are hooked on food, and I say hooked because it's not only drugs people get hooked on, food as well. The substances which people get hooked on appeal to our senses. And so one of the senses which really falls prey is the sense of taste. Most people eat food based on how it tastes and how it looks. And when you read Ellen G. White's books, she makes sure, she said, food should be prepared in its simplest form and be made attractive. So one of the reasons why people don't like the health message, healthy eating, the food, the way it's prepared, sometimes it's not appealing to the eye. So most people tend to stay away. Most men don't want to eat it. They're like, they would rather eat meat and potatoes. But anyhow, so I'm saying this because if you are into healthy cooking, you can realize that even if you don't want to change, like you do want to change from vegan, vegetarian, whatever you want to call it, if you start preparing your food and laying it out in a way that it's presentable, and you start adding the herbs and the natural herbs in your food that it appeals to your taste buds will forget the taste of the other unhealthy meals you're accustomed to. And I'm saying this because it's doable, that because in this connective tissue is memory. When God fearfully and wonderfully made you and I, he gave every single body part memory to remember. And I say this because we are faced with this pandemic situation today. What is the current solution? Vaccines. The world is pushing vaccines because vaccines creates memory. And that's how God created us. When an individual is injected with a vaccine, the body creates protein biomarkers. I'm using just a simple term here, which help identify that virus next time it shows up and makes the body attacks it with force to destroy. It has its own issues because our bodies sometimes attack their own cells. So most of the autoimmune diseases we see today, autoimmune, and there are a lot of them. I don't want to name any because it's a long list. It can range from multiple sclerosis, MS, to diabetes sometimes, to maybe Lou Gehrig's, to maybe there's a lot of other things of disease of the nervous system. The body, when the body is exposed the second time, it doesn't know sometimes to differentiate between your own cells and the cell of the virus. So the body can destroy even its own cells. So any toxin which enters the body, be it a toxin which is meant for good or for healing, the body has memory. That's the rationale behind food allergies and drug allergies. That's why when you go to your doctor, the doctor asks you, are you allergic to anything? You say, yes, the penicillins, I'm allergic to iodine. There's a reason why the doctor is asking you that. Because if you're allergic to something and your body is exposed to it, it's going to respond with extra force, and it can cause a reaction, which can be extensive, which can lead to anaphylactic shock. So most people who are allergic to bees, to peanut butter, even children who are allergic to peanut butter, have to keep an antihistamine with them, like an EpiPen or some of these oral antihistamines, because if that person is exposed to what they're allergic to, the body fights with a vengeance. So I say this for a reason, because most people who are living today are inflamed, they are swollen, because their body is constantly exposed to things which are not good for the body, and the body fights. So we do see some diseases which come across related to lifestyles, which could be prevented, and we call those preventable diseases or non-communicable diseases. It's a big deal. You can check the United Nations or any of your countries' websites on health or your CDC site, and you will see chronic diseases are one of our biggest problems before the corona got here. COVID-19 was just coming to seal the deal of, hey, you guys have a lot going on in your camps. We saw a lot of people who lost their lives because they had pre-existing conditions. They were diabetic, had high blood pressure, heart disease, high cholesterol, and other autoimmune conditions. And we continue to see that today because the pandemic had immediate effects and later effects. Because more people are not moving, they have a higher risk of even dying from the same things we had before the corona got here. And this is the message which is going out there now. And to make things even more complicated, there are certain diseases which are present in African Americans. I use the term African American because in America, they refer to people of color or Black people as African American because we like to make sure we're not insulting anyone. So people who have dark skin, African Americans, Hispanics, and Asians have a risk of certain diseases irrespective. So we carry a risk factor for diabetes, for heart disease, for high blood pressure. Naturally, the dark skinned people do. And I'm saying dark so I don't get struck by the wrong term here. We do. So we also carry a genetic factor from our parents, which is a 10% range. However, 40% is environment, 30% is lifestyle, and 20% is clinical care. So what the clinical arena does for our health contributes 20% of our outcomes. 30% is what you do with yourself every day. 40% is your environment, which can range from not having clean water, access to food, health literacy, or access to healthcare, or access to a clean, safe places to walk and parks and stuff like that. That's why you see the public health people are constantly looking at killing mosquitoes, because mosquitoes are a threat. Making sure that there's clean water, testing the water, making sure that there's a clean park and a walk pathway which is safe, so nobody gets run over by a car or something, because that's 40% of our health outcome is our environment. And I heard a question earlier, does it mean that people who are living under stressful environments are at a higher risk of getting, let's say, blood pressure? And the answer is yes. Blood pressure is a silent killer. Usually does not present with symptoms at all. Some people might get a headache. Some people don't get anything until they get a stroke. So each person needs to know their normal blood pressure. Anything above 120/80 is high. How low can it get? Probably 100 over anywhere up about 55 is considered normal for those who are physically fit and healthy. But anything below 90/50, that's too low, because you can also pass out because blood is no longer going to the brain. So here we've covered a few things. Before I take your questions, I want to talk a little bit about the spiritual applications which came from the book, The Body Temple. This is what they wrote. I didn't write it. Spiritual applications. When we say the epithelial cell absorbed, they say Christ was treated as we deserve, that we might be treated as he deserved. He was condemned for our sins, in which he had no share, that we might be justified by his righteousness, in which we had no share. He suffered the death which was ours, that we might receive the life which was his. This is Ellen G. White, Desire of Ages, page 25. He was wounded for our transgressions. He was bruised for our iniquities. He was chastised, and his chastisement is of our peace was upon him. And he was, with his stripes we are healed. Isaiah 53, verse 5. So you realize now that when we talk about the health message, it begins with the foundation of understanding God's plan for creation. And that in that plan, he provided us the means of escape from internal threats and external threats to this human body. The second point is secretes. It absorbs, one. Secondly, secretes. For God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son, that whoever believeth in him should not perish, but have everlasting life. John 3, verse 16. He that spared not his son, his own son, but delivered him up for us, oh, how shall he not with him also freely give us all the things? So God has given us a means of escape, Romans 8, verse 32. And then transport. But God, who is rich in mercy, for his great love wherewith he loved us, even when we are dead in sin, he quickened us together with Christ. By grace ye are saved. And he has raised us together and made us to sit up in heavenly places with Jesus. Ephesians 2, verse 4-6. In all their afflictions, he was afflicted, and the angels of his presence saved them. In his love, in his purity, he redeemed them, and he bare them and carried them all the days of old. Isaiah 63, verse 9. And so as we continue to talk about this connective tissue, we realize that to every single thing I talked about is a verse. So excretes, there is no fear in love, but perfect love casts away all fear, because fear has torment. He that fears is not made of perfect love. 1 John 4:14. So when you look at this message closely, you begin to understand, yes, there are things we don't have control over, but they are things we have control over. So the health message, therefore, is to help us to come to a place where we can understand that this body, which is fearfully and wonderfully made, has this connective tissue, which of course is biological. However, there are spiritual applications. Connective tissue connects, it binds, it supports the structure. The Word of God connects us to our Creator, also supports us in our journey of life. Because Isaiah wrote it, he said, "Fear thou not, fear, for I am with thee. Be not be dismayed, for I am thy God. I'll strengthen thee. Yea, I'll help thee. Yea, I'll uphold thee with the right hand of my righteousness." Isaiah 41, verse 10. This tissue we talked about has great deal, because I'm going to talk about how between the cells is what we call extracellular space. These little cells, as they are connected with connective tissue to form tissue, to form organs, between them, there are gaps, there's space. So most of the diseases we see today, there is fluid built up in the intercellular space. And that built up fluid has escaped the circulatory system. And so most people suffer from these problems associated with fluid in the wrong place. And I say this because most people don't realize they are swollen. So for most people who embark on a journey of healthy eating, for instance, or healthy living, they will lose up to maybe 10 pounds in less than a week. It's fluid coming out of where it should not have been in the first place. And this fluid is existing with salt attached to it, with chemicals attached to it. So therefore, if we are going to be taking care of the extracellular space, we need to be mindful how we nourish our bodies. And I always say the health message might not be for everyone, but it's definitely for someone, because God gave us this message. So this connective tissue forms this protective sheath. These sheaths are also present in every hollow organ. A hollow organ is when you have a channel or a hole in it. There's an opening in the center. So most of you are wondering, what is that major hollow organ in our body? There's two major systems which are simply comprised of hollow organs. The digestive system is one of them, and the circulatory system is one of them. So you're thinking, oh my goodness. So whatever enters the digestive system will definitely enter the circulatory system. It's absorbed in the blood. Yes, that's why most of the time people use these terms, that disease is in the blood. So for most people who are still partaking animal products, they are consuming whatever is in the blood of that animal. And for most people who are of the Jewish belief system, they don't eat anything unless the blood has been drained out of it completely. And so there's some significance in what I'm saying here, because if diseases are in the blood and you don't feel well, you go to your doctor. Your doctor draws blood, and in the blood, he look at your lab report. He's looking at what's present, the minerals. Of course, we don't see much of the vitamins, but some of them you can read them in the blood because they're broken down and used up by the body. In that blood is also waste. So when waste has not been eliminated out of the body, it circulates. That then brings us to that place where we now gain a better understanding why water is part of the health message, because when waste continues to circulate in the blood, it's going to damage the inside lining of your arteries. If anything, you gotta flush it out. So we do have diseases which are associated with the damage of the inside of arteries. I did explain to you. Cholesterol being laid onto the inside of the arteries is called plaque, which is really solid, unmovable, unless if you take those heavy-duty statins, which breaks down the cholesterol so that you can excrete it. It can go through the kidneys or through the feces, eventually after it circulates. So the best remedy is to really avoid any extra fatty food. Fried foods should not be eaten by anyone. And I don't own a restaurant or anything, but I'm telling you, when you look at this, you're thinking, okay, so why is this significant? Because picture this, if you have a toxin which is absorbed in your digestive system, it enters the arteries, it damages the inside of the arteries. And we'll talk more about this when we talk about the cardiac system. The body repairs the artery with fat, cholesterol, plaque, whatever you want to call it. It's solid. You've seen it in some of the pictures. How is blood going to flow to your body parts when you're clogged? It doesn't. And that's one of the challenges with diabetes. Diabetes, high blood pressure, and cholesterol are cousins. Once a person gets high blood pressure, if they don't change their lifestyle, they are definitely going to get diabetic by the age of 45 or 65. That's when we see most people deteriorate, especially if they are maintaining an unhealthy body weight. Why is this significant? Because when toxins damage the inside of the arteries, they cause plaque to build up. It blocks blood flow. When blood doesn't flow, tissue dies because there's no oxygen, water, minerals, and vitamins going to the tissue. It dies. So some people are dying slowly. So we age, yes, but some people age faster and get sicker faster because of that. If that toxin damages the inside of your vein, you're going to have blood clots, because veins are valves to stop blood from backflowing. However, when things are not flowing right in the veins, there's going to be clotting. And I just want to say this because I told you the tissue, the smoothness is lining hollow organs, and our veins and our arteries are hollow. And so when we talk about the health message, we are talking about guarding the avenues of our soul. And I'll do this session on the avenues of our soul. Anything I hear, I eat, I taste, I smell, I touch, I sniff, I put on my skin, when it enters my body, if it's of no value to build my body, it might be damaging unless my body gets rid of it real quickly. We have heard people who are suffering today with challenges of the use of perms on their heads. It's a big deal. I know there's quite a few studies which have been trying to look at why are certain cultures not carrying a child to term, having a lot of, low birth weight and so forth. There's a lot being said about some things. We don't know why they're happening, but I can tell you that a lot of toxins which people ingest or use on their bodies, or I don't know, or smell or use in their homes to clean, they are what we call cytotoxins. Cytotoxins, which means it's poison to the cell, because the cell is cyto. They are also called neurotoxins, because neurotoxins, that it's poison to the nerves. They are also called carcinogenics. Carcinogenics means they cause cancer. So you're thinking, okay, so that's the connection, therefore, with what we talked about last week, how the cell has a wall. And when something enters the cell wall, because it's permeable, it allows things in and out, that cell can be changed, yes. So we live in a time in history where there's so many potential potent agents which can alter our cells. They have looked at a lot of studies. Some of them call them epigenetics, which literally is saying that our genes are changing. And so I speak to the people of God here. The Bible says, by beholding, you become changed. There's a lot of things we behold with our ears, our eyes, our mouth, a sense of taste, which changes us from the inside out. Inasmuch as most people who are living today think we are physical beings, we are spiritual beings first, because we did not create ourselves. And once a person negates to understand the body is a temple, they are failing to embrace that God created us with the responsibility to care for this body and also to inhabit the earth and be fruitful and multiply. It is humans doing that. A lot of what we call food today is food. It was never intended to be food. Some of it is business. It helps business boom when we consume certain things. And I'm not here to, disappoint anyone, but I'm telling you this because when God say that I will create men in our own image, let us create men in our own image, he meant that human beings have the ability to connect with God and to stay connected with God. Sin caused the separation. God made a way. So when we talk about the body being a temple, you as an individual have to be mindful of anything you eat, drink, smoke, touch, feel, hear, even your type of clothing matters. So the dress reform and the health reform, they are kind of cousins. They exist in the same room. They tie in together because with the dress reform comes use of tight clothing and untight clothing. And with the health reform comes the blood has to circulate so that there's good nourishment to the tissue and the cells of the body are met. The organs of the body stay functioning. There's certain type of clothing which constricts airflow or blood flow. So the tissue is a big deal. I also want to say this, not only do the hollow organs transport, not only does connective tissue transport, it stores things, storage. And when it comes to storage, I will talk a little bit about the liver in our next session when we talk about the internal organs. Very, very important. Whatever you don't use is stored somewhere. So you're all thinking, is that why people get fatty liver? Yes, to a certain extent. Is that why people end up having excess body weight and they can't even move? To a certain extent, yes. But there are other underlying causes which resides in the endocrine system, the hormones and the secretions from the other glands, which we'll talk about at a later date. For today, I want you to realize that this tissue, this connective tissue, connects cells together. It transports things, it stores things, it also repairs things. So in order for healing to take place, therefore, any healing, whether you are using natural remedies or you are using drugs from the chemistry or the pharmacy, or you're using any other healing, solutions you might think of, healing, repair happens at connective tissue level. This connective tissue, the type varies from organ to organ. It also varies depending on what disease somebody has suffered from. So when you go to your doctor, they ask you about your history. Do you have this? Do you have that? Do you have that? They're trying to find out what's wrong with you, to find out how best to treat you. That's what they're doing. And it's good that you tell your doctor your whole history, because if you have a history of cancer in your family, they want to know that, because cancer does have a genetic component. If you also smoke or drink, they need to know that, because smoke and drink is toxins to the body. And I say this because it is. Drinking of liquor and smoking of any other substances out there, they are poisons to the body, which alter the mood of the body. And how this does that, it crosses the barrier between the blood and the brain. It's called the blood-brain barrier. Certain foods do the same thing. So there are certain people like, oh, I can't stop eating cheese, or I can't stop doing this. They literally have formed habits associated with certain foods. So they have to identify that. So as we talk about connective tissue, it also have certain characteristics. It can be loose, it can be dense, it can be elastic. Makes things complicated. So if this connective tissue is supposed to be elastic and now it's no longer elastic, we see diseases. And if this connective tissue is supposed to be dense to support and now it's loose, we see diseases. And if this connective tissue is supposed to be loose and it's now dense or elastic, we see diseases. That's why we have so many diagnostic tests. We have several of them. We have blood work, urine tests, we have biopsies, we have x-rays, we have MRIs, we have PET scans, we have CAT scans, we have all these other radioactive analyses which we do, because we are looking at tissue level to see what is there. We're literally just checking things out. And then when we know what's there, we know how to treat it. So you realize that the cost of diagnostic is getting high. An MRI could cost anything up to $2,500. So we have the need for these things, no doubt about it. But some people don't have access to these tests. You know, some people, you will never know what's wrong with them because they don't have access to the tests. But I'm just pointing out to you here that this is where the issue is. It's with tissue. And when we can understand the nature of tissue and how to care for our bodies at this level, we can make decisions with lifestyle. So there are some spiritual aspects to this connective tissue, which is loose, dense, and elastic, according to the Body Temple, the book Body Temple. This is what they wrote, and I'm going to read to you now. When I say this is what they wrote, those are not my own words. But what I'm sharing with you is my own words and my own experience. Loose tissue. The loose connective tissue represents the support of God, even for the ungodly. For if he did not give them breath, they could not continue to exist. He is not able to give them the dense support that he can give his followers because they do not ask for it. But I say unto you, love your enemies, bless them that curse you, do good to them that hate you, and pray for them which despitefully use you, that you may be the children of your Father, which is in heaven. For he maketh his sun to rise on the evil and on the good, sendeth rain on the just and the unjust. Matthew 5, verse 44 to 45. So these spiritual applications, the authors of the book intended to ensure that people can connect with the body tissue and the body functions and relate to a spiritual component. So I kind of like this loose connective tissue, which is God's love for the ungodly. Then you have the dense. The dense connective tissue represents the firm support for that our Heavenly Father gives to those who are members of his family. Let your conversation be without covetousness, and be content with such things as ye have. For he that says, I will never leave thee nor forsake thee, so that we may boldly say, the Lord is my helper, and I will not fear what men shall do unto me. Hebrews 13, verses 5 to 16. Now unto him that is able to keep you from falling and to present you faultless before the presence of his glory with exceeding joy. Jude 24. Dense tissue. God created this dense tissue. It's within us. We just have to make sure that we don't allow dense tissue to be loose. That's what they're trying to say here. And then elastic, like a rubber. Elastic fibers stretch easily when they are pulled and return to their original shape when the force is removed. Sometimes the Lord has withdrawn some of his support in order for us to learn our lessons, because they rebelled against the words of God and despised the counsel of the Most High. Therefore, their trouble, and he saved them of their distress. Psalms 107, 11 to 13. So I want to just talk a little bit about the other types before I take your questions, because we will end this on time. This connective tissue, which we talked about, we'll walk around with it. And my hope and prayer is that as we share these things, it stays with you. That before you bite the next donut, before you bite the next meal, you remember you are fearfully and wonderfully made. I'll touch a little bit about matrix tissue and cartilage. And so matrix is the connective tissue, which includes fiber. So as I move, as I speak to you, God gave my body the intelligence that when my little muscle filaments glide back and forth, my mouth will move. When my hands do this, my little microfilaments and my little collagen tissue is gliding. When there's not enough lubrication, gliding is impaired. We have disease processes which results in muscles not gliding and moving. We see them all the time. Some of that is happening at brain level. Some of that is happening at local level. A good example is Parkinsonism, Parkinson's disease, which a person loses their ability to move. Another good example is when people have poisoning, where they get paralysis. It happens sometimes with certain poisons that you lose your muscle function. And another thing also is when we have trauma to the body. When somebody strains something or get cut by something, those fibers are no longer going to glide the way they were intended to glide like. Scar tissue sits in the way. So there's some relevance to this. Trauma, when it happens to the spiritual human being, it can present itself with some dysfunction. So it's up to us to really embrace the whole health message so that we can minimize the scarring which happens when things happen. Because we have a lot of scars as individuals. Remember, I told you we are spiritual beings first. We are spiritual. So when we talk about connective tissue, let's also think about certain components in our body, which I'm just going to list. Think about your plasma cells, the cells which produce antibodies, which protects us from infections. Yes, that's what I'm talking about. Think about the mast cells, the cells which produce heparin, which reduces the blood from clotting, and also histamine. So most people today suffer from deficiencies in their nutrients, which results in blood clotting. So for those of you who don't eat greens, chances are you gotta probably have to take a blood thinner at some point. Here in the US, they use Coumadin, Plavix, and aspirin. And once a person is put on Coumadin, aspirin, or Plavix, they no longer can eat collard greens. By collard greens, I mean your covos and your rape and your kale. People call them different things, or broccoli, or string beans, or spinach. Those are the greens I'm talking about. So you're thinking, okay, so does that mean consumption of these can prevent diseases? Yes, surely it can. Science has told us that. And God put that in the book of Genesis 1:29. He said, these plants and the herbs are for your healing. So mast cells produce heparin. Heparin is an anti-clotting. We see a lot of people throwing blood clots. Some people die when they travel long distance because they develop a blood clot. And by the time they reach their destination, they have a blood clot which is migrated to the lungs. Blood clots form in veins. When people don't move, blood stays still. It's a risk factor. There's a lot of risk factors, and we'll talk about risk factors. Then leukocytes. Leukocytes also have connective tissue, which produces your white blood cells, which allows us to destroy microorganisms and destroy garbage. So when we talk about bacteria, viruses, and the deficiency of leukocytes, diseases sit in because we can't fight. The body cannot fight if you don't give it what to fight with. And so there's a total about 7 different cells which are classified as supportive. Some of these cells are found in our joints, cartilage tissue. We have a lot of hip replacement and knee replacements going on now than ever. 50, 60 knee replacement. They used to delay them until somebody's over 50, over 65, but I've seen some people as young as 50. Knee replacement, artificial joint being knocked into your knee because it's worn out. So wear and tear happens for many reasons. However, when the body is not well nourished, it gets worn out faster and more than the body which is well nourished. So we are going to end here by saying there's also types of cartilage, hyaline cartilage. And according to the authors of this book, they say biological and spiritual applications of cartilage. Hyaline cartilage is this translucent blue-white layer which protects the joints. Cartilage protects the joints. Also, cartilage is in muscles. It allows muscles to be strong, to be able to function. It also is allowing flexibility. So I'll end by saying, when you look at measures of fitness, being fit, and I had a session I did, Fit for 9, Fit for Eternity. Measures of fitness are associated with strength, endurance, and flexibility. And the Bible is very clear that he who began this work in us will be with us till the end. So I want to take your questions at this point and say that's the end of body tissue, connective tissue. Now, next session, we'll be looking at body systems. We're going to look at the respiratory system, the nervous system, the digestive system, the urinary system, the reproductive system. I don't think we can touch all systems because I'll be here to answer your questions, but we'll begin by talking about the skeletal system and the immune system. So don't miss our next session on the skeletal system, immune and lymphatic system. And I think we can talk about those two and possibly the muscular system. I am here to take your questions. Thank you for being good listeners. I hope this message helps someone connect the dots between what is the health message and how can we embrace it as a message which is not just about what we eat, but about who we are in Christ Jesus. Thank you. Question time before we close.
Dr. Stella,
Yes.
Going back to something Sister Progress says, because I'm thinking of the water factor. I find personally, and I can just give you my personal experience, I find if I have a set routine where I'm drinking water, like my quota for the day, like the recommended allowance, if I do that religiously, then I find I won't be going to the toilet every minute. But the moment I stop my routine and don't drink as much water during the day, that is when I'm affected and I'm starting to run to the toilet more often. So I don't know if this is something that would be useful for Sister Progress to think about. It could be that, I mean, that's my experience, but it could be that that's what's happening to her as well. Because our body's not used to it, if you're not in a routine, then you tend to go more often.
That's a brilliant one. Thank you for suggesting that. I love it. I always tell people this. By the time you're thirsty, you're already dehydrated. So most people should drink on a schedule. And I also tell people this, do not drink too much towards the end of the day because it will keep you up at night. So routinely, I like what she does to wake up in the morning and drink. There is some writings out there which say that you nourish your spinal cord and your brain with drinking first thing in the morning. I've seen it. I don't know whether the research is backed up or not. But most of the time when we wake up in the morning, we are dehydrated because we've been sleeping all night. So if you find yourself, you wake up and the first thing you're doing is eating breakfast, perhaps you need to drink first. And I also want to say this, the liver is the dishwasher or clothes washer. It washes things out. It detoxifies things. It breaks things down. It functions efficiently when we are sleeping because it takes a lot of blood from the body. Because during the day, blood is everywhere in the muscles, you're moving, you're working. So when you're lying down, the liver has the ability to function efficiently. And most of the time, between the time we wake up to maybe about midday, is trying to eliminate the toxins out of the body, because that's the time you're moving around now and blood is flowing, so it can go in through the kidneys and be filtered. So drinking in the morning, first thing in the morning, is definitely a good habit. It's not for everyone because some people have to take their medicines and they have to eat while they drink. And it's understandable. It varies from person to person. But I like the drinking on schedule because that's what I do. By the time, if I get a headache, I know I have not drank enough. I know for sure. So I drink on schedule. I don't wait until I'm thirsty because by that time, and I don't sip my water like other people, like a little sip. I had heard at some point that when you do that, you're letting your body think water is coming, water is coming. So I drink my water one time and I put it down and I'm done. I don't drink like a sip like other people do, but some people do. So different people look at this differently, but hydration, definitely. I like what you said, and that is excellent. Thank you.
And can I just add, Dr. Stella, in terms of elimination, I'm just speaking from personal experience. I find if I eat clean, in inverted commas, like if I have my fruits, then I will eliminate sort of shortly afterwards. If I have salad, I eliminate shortly afterwards. But if I eat junk, then it's slow to move. So it's all really in my case, and like I said, I'm speaking from my experience, it's dependent on the foods that I ingest as to what my movement is going to be.
Absolutely. That is so true. Fiber, yes, and fruits tend to digest faster than other foods. Sugar, and you bring a very valid point there. When people are not eating enough vegetables and fruit, they do have some limitations in how their bowels move. It's not everybody who can eat fruit and vegetables, because some people have medications which prohibits them to take this. So definitely, I like your experience. It's my experience too. And I am going to say this, most people are full of refuse. It's just a loose term I'm going to use. They're full because they have not been emptying properly before. And so the doctor will ask you, when was the last time you moved your bowel movements? You had a bowel movement, but they don't frequently ask you, how often do you move and how often do you eat? And so I'm with you there. I agree with you. Not everybody has access to fruit and vegetables. Some people end up taking extra fiber, which is fiber corn or one of those fibers. I don't want to call names because I'm not endorsing any, but I've seen people having to take. So with what you just said, this is a good understanding. There's soluble fiber and insoluble fiber. There's fiber which dissolves and is absorbed to a certain extent. The majority of the fiber is not absorbed by the body. It stays in the GI and it draws water to itself to allow the smooth moves. Yep. So that's a plus. I like your comments. Beautiful. Thank you.
Okay, that's it.
Yep. So are we any other questions before we close?
If no one is going to say anything, can I just make one final point?
Yes, thank you. Yes.
You spoke about our cells and vaccination. Now you spoke about the COVID vaccination. My understanding of the COVID-19 vaccination is that it alters the cellular structure. And
Well,
I understand it does not work in the same way as others. So in terms of this alteration, that would be rather concerning, because you still want your cells to be able to function at the level that it was made. And if it's I don't know, I find the whole thing confusing, because with vaccinations, my understanding is that it's supposed to it's memory producing, so that if you come into contact with the disease, once you've had that vaccination, when you come into contact, if and when you come into contact with the disease in the future, it recognizes and it causes an immune response. But with the COVID, yes, people have still been getting COVID as a result. Some say, albeit in a milder form, but on the other side, people have also died despite having the vaccination. So in terms of how it works at a cellular level, I'm just a bit confused and concerned, to say the least.
Okay, I hear you, and thank you for sharing that. I'm neither for nor against the vaccine. I just want to make sure everybody understands. Vaccinations have been used over years and centuries to eliminate certain things, like the polio was eradicated through vaccines. They go through trials and testing. However, when they do a trial of any study, they recruit certain candidates for the study. So just to be clear on this particular vaccine, the vaccines they have, what might be helpful for anyone is to read the studies and the people it was tested on. But however, it has saved a lot of lives based on what we are hearing. The body has, what I'm going to say, and we'll talk about this next week, the body has primary immunity and secondary immunity. So we do have primary immunity, but not everybody has good primary immunity. It tends to be enhanced by breastfeeding and also normal delivery for children. It tends to enhance that. And it's related to that microbiome I was talking about, those defense mechanisms also from ourselves. So with what you're saying, I would specifically say people have to be informed and make decisions. We've routinely used vaccines. Like here in the US and other countries, we have the influenza vaccine, which every year we have a different vaccine. And there are people who every year they take that vaccine. There are also people who've never taken the vaccine, but they say once you take it, you have to keep taking it. That's what we hear. We have the flu vaccine here because the flu challenges population a lot. It tends to challenge the seniors more than the younger population. So most people who are young don't usually get the flu vaccine, but most of our seniors get a flu vaccine every year. So when we look next week at the immune system and the lymphatic system, you gain a better understanding on how the immune system works, the defense mechanism. I can tell you this. If you were to go on any CDC site in any country, you realize that there's always a section which talks about how to naturally boost your immunity and your health. There's always a section. I know here in the US, there's a section which talks about boosting your immunity. And there are certain habits and lifestyle habits which affects our immunity, like lack of sleep will make someone prone to diseases more than anything out there. So I think creating balance and knowing things and making decisions on how to live would help a lot of people. Is that a good comment?
Yes, very good comment. Thank you, Dr. Stella. Very good comment.
Thank you. So next week, let's explore that, the skeletal system, the muscular system, and the lymphatic and immune system. We can just move as fast as everybody has questions because it's good for us to understand these things, because what you just said, there are certain foods which affects the body just like any of these things we're talking about. These vaccines, certain foods do. Because certain chemicals are also in our food we ingest every time. Yes. So looking at those labels, if you see something you cannot pronunciate, probably it's a chemical which is made to keep that food shelf life longer, or also to enhance your appetite. So there is an appetite enhancers out there. Some of them were created based on harvested embryonic cells from aborted fetus, and they stimulate people's appetite to eat certain things, to drink certain things. And some of these drinks people drink them every day. They are promoted as healthy as well. So you have to do your own research. So if you type, I believe the word is Sinomix, you'll see what I'm talking about. There are companies out there which put it outright that we have found a way of stimulating people's appetite using appetite enhancers. So there's a lot of products which have appetite enhancers, and it's not a secret. You can read from those companies. The lists are published. It's not for me to really talk about any one of them. I don't consume any one of their products, but people do. Some of them might be making water, some of them might be making soft drinks, some of them might be making condiments and sweets and candy and bubblegum and all that. So when you see what we consume, you see that we tend to consume things which appeal to us. So anything which appeals to us, we want it. And we have to now to go to back eating as close as we can to the ground, if you can. If not, then you have to make the necessary adjustments. So the health message is going to vary from place to place and from person to person, because access is not always guaranteed. You know what I'm saying? It's not always guaranteed, but there are ways to boost your immunity. So next week, if we have a little more time, I'll share with you God's pharmacy next week. God's pharmacy, which tells us that certain foods look a certain way and our body parts look the same way. And also science has proven that this is beneficial. So perhaps we can start there next week by talking about God's pharmacy. And then we can move into the next segment, because that's good to know that God has a plan. And also, I'm also going to say this, part of the reason why we eat the way we eat is because human beings have created a desire for certain things, and industries have worked hard to give us what we want. You know what I'm saying? If we're not buying certain things, you think they'll still be making them? They make them because we like them. So we are the consumers, yeah. And so industries can't keep up. We have food shortages because certain things we consume more of. And we need certain foods to survive, but we don't need every single thing we consume to survive. We don't. Some of the things we don't need to eat them. So that's my take on that. So anyhow, we go. Oh, most welcome. All right, so we'll meet you in the other room at 8 p.m. UK time. I think it's 3 p.m. here in Florida, where we'll talk about energy and resilience, because you are people who are getting ready to just keep pressing on. Thank you so much for your audience. We meet here once a week for 2 hours between 11 a.m. to 1 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, Florida time, and 4 p.m. to 6 p.m. UK time. And I believe it's 5 to 7 in other places, I believe, or 6 to 8 in other places. All right, thank you so much, good people. Let's keep on embracing the health message. That is a lifesaver. That's how I look at it.
Thanks, Dr. Stella. Most interesting and mostly needed, I can say, especially in these times that we're living in. Most appreciated. Thank you.
Oh, most welcome. You can share the link with anyone who wants to come, and they can also watch it later on
Thank you, Dr.
YouTube.
Stella.
Oh, most welcome.
Thank you so much. God bless you.
Oh, thank you. We'll connect, okay? Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Have a good week.
Thanks, Dr. Stella. See you later.